Thank you so much for being here. I truly mean that. It's an incredibly difficult time right now, and I know distracting, emotional time for us all here and for our neighbors in the Plumas, everyone in Chicago Park and Colfax and near the Bear River right now, and everyone's still fighting the Dixie Fire. So I just wanted to take time and appreciate everyone who is fighting that and everyone who is evacuated and still making the time to be here. It's now more than ever, right? We need to come together, not only to find community and comfort in each other, but also moving forward. We all know the work we have to do and how crucial it is. So, and I think you all know that by showing up. So thank you again. So if we could just get this started with all of our participants, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. And for those of you who don't know, my name is Mary McDonald. I work at Circle. I'm the now lead facilitator of the Yuba Forest Network. It's been my privilege for nearly a year now, and I'm excited to keep it going. Thanks so much.
And good morning, everyone. Andrew Salmon, also with Circle. I am the Forest Conservation Project Manager for a few more hours, as a preface there. I have really enjoyed working with this group as well as some of our other side projects, and just wanted to say thank you. I will be leaving Circle and have taken a position with Blue Forest Conservation. So I'll still be working in the area and still working throughout the state on forest and fire management related issues. So I hope that we're all able to stay in touch. With that also said, if you know anyone who is interested, or if you in fact are interested in coming and joining a great team at Circle and working with Mary on the Yuba Forest Network, please take a look at our website. We have the job posted at the moment and would love your input. So thanks so much for being here and under these really tough times.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that was our major announcement of the day. Andrew's been an incredible co-worker, boss, mentor, all of the above. So it's definitely, we're gonna miss him big time. But if there are any other announcements, feel free to speak up now or throw it in the chat. And I'm just gonna go through our agenda real quick, what we have going on today. So Jamie Irvin of Sierra Forest Legacy is going to talk to us about prescribed burn associations and specifically the Yuba Bear Burn Cooperative. After that, I'm going to give a progress report and engage you all on our strategy document that we've been working really hard on in the strategy subgroup for the past, who knows how many months, almost a year now. And then lastly, we have Patrick Wright of the Governor's Forest Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force is going to talk to us also. So that should be really exciting. And we'll have time for Q&A throughout all of those presentations at the end. And then we'll have time for announcements if anyone thinks of any at the end as well. So with that, Jamie, let me give you screen sharing abilities. Here, let me stop mine first.
Sure. Let me pull something up here. Am I good to go on sharing screen?
You're good to go.
Okay. I've got a PDF PowerPoint here that it was partly made for a different presentation I did a long time ago. So apologies if this PowerPoint doesn't seem current. Yeah, well, thanks. I'm here to talk for just a short bit today about this project for the Yuba Bear Burn Cooperative. So I'm Jamie Irvin. I know about half of the names I see on the call here. My employer is the conservation group Sierra Forest Legacy, and I work primarily on wildfire policy and particularly on promoting prescribed fire through policy. But 20% of my job or so over the last 2.5 years has been devoted to creating this prescribed burn association for private landowners in our area. And has been a really rewarding project, and it's something fun that I get to work on that includes time in the field, and something that people can work together on to do something that almost everyone agrees is good for the forest. So it's kind of, I know a lot of folks are having a hard week right now, and I'm actually, my house wasn't threatened, but we evacuated to Sacramento. I'm in a friend's kitchen right now. But this is really like a positive thing in our community that has gained steam, and we were set back a little bit by the COVID pandemic, but had a good little short burn season this last year during the winter. So I'm going to go through, and then Mary, if I'm running out of time or something, you can cut me off. But this is just, why is a conservation group interested in private lands? That Sierra Forest Legacy normally works on public lands. I just include this kind of outdated map of the Tahoe National Forest to show like there's no real way to address the health of the forest landscape in our area without looking at the private lands. These are all checkerboard, and all the white is private. So Prescribed Burns Association, this is a model that has gained steam in a lot of areas of California for helping private landowners and nonprofit groups and others that want to use prescribed fire on private lands, helping make that an accessible tool. The idea comes out of ranch land burning associations in the Midwest, but there's a group up in Humboldt County and another in Sonoma County, and those are kind of the two oldest, most established ones that started using this like volunteer-driven model for burning on private lands. And the group in our area that I've helped work with is called the Yuba Bear Burn Cooperative. The idea, though, is to create a group of people that are interested in burning, volunteer-driven group, create a list of projects. People have lands that they want to burn on, and you can, as a group, share equipment and coordinate around permitting and do trainings and education, and volunteer time on each other's burns. And so it's a way to make prescribed fire a lot cheaper and a lot more accessible, and generally something that like you don't need to be an expert in fire management to do. So this is something that's gaining steam. There's probably 10 or 12 PBAs throughout the state, all in varying levels of development. Ours is kind of a young one, and one that we don't have a full-time coordinator or anything. And we're a little different in that almost everyone in our group wants to burn for defensible space and forest health. It's mostly burning for fuel reduction that our group is interested in. And some of these other PBAs are made up primarily of ranchers. It's a good tool for burning and maintaining and improving ranch lands, and we're interested in that too. It's just we haven't done any ranch land burns yet, and I think the greater need in our area seems to be fuel reduction, just from what I've folks that have gotten in touch with me. So we've been around since 2019. The core group of landowners that are involved are based either in Grass Valley, Nevada City, and in North San Juan. I coordinate with a small portion of my time. It's not really enough to like really serve as a community hub for this group, but it's enough to keep the group moving and have some meetings and apply for grants. And it's been good to have a little bit of coordination support. We're also partnered with the Fire Safe Council of Nevada County on the project now, and I'm kind of interested over the long term in building this up as a project of the Fire Safe Council. And we've talked about that a little bit, the pros and cons of it. Right now, there's no official nonprofit called the Yuba Bear Burn Cooperative. It's just an email listserv that I manage, and landowners that meet and work together and do burns. Other groups in the state have formed, actual boards of directors and their projects of bigger nonprofits, that kind of thing. But we're figuring all the paperwork side of things out. And in the meanwhile, people are actually doing some burns. So yeah, there's about 140 people on our listserv right now. Landowners use the email list to draw volunteers to their burn. So if you want to join, just email me, and I can put my email in the chat after this. And have been pretty successful at getting people to come out and volunteer their time, both for prep work and for burning. There's no prescribed fire experience needed for this. We have a few folks in our group that are experienced burners, from having worked either for the Forest Service or for volunteer fire departments or for SPI, or just there's different people with different levels of experience. But if you want to come join for a burn, you don't even have to participate. You can just come observe. I think it's a great educational thing to see what low intensity fire looks like and see the kind of resources that are needed for a prescribed burn. And see that it's not really, doesn't have to be this scary thing when we burn in the right conditions and we have all the equipment that we need around and the right number of people. It's a big education tool, I think, for people just get to see prescribed fire firsthand. So there's no training or anything involved, but we do host different kinds of trainings and we host public meetings to talk about project priorities. And I'd say we have a list of about 20 projects that we're hoping to do right now. And we'd like to build that out. And since this is the YFN group, I think our boundary, we drew it as the entire, all 3 forks of the Yuba and the Bear River watershed. Almost everyone's right now is located in either the South Yuba or the Bear, just because of where I'm based and where the gear trailer lives. And that's the population center. But if there's anyone on here that's from Yuba County or Sierra County, parts of the Yuba watershed, we're definitely interested in working there too, and would be willing to come host a training and meet with you and talk about prescribed fire. So if anyone on this call is from those areas, I'd love to get in touch and talk about it. I don't live in that area and I'm less familiar with it. Oh, and so I'm just going to go through a few photos. I'll do real short on each of these. This was actually our first burn. We just burned a 1/4 acre in the middle of one of our landowners' driveways as a training event in June. And it was like, about as low key as it gets, but it was a valuable experience, I think, for the 20 or so people that showed up. Last February, we did a few acres of our friend Nina Allen's property up off Highway 20. Had a great burn with maybe 25 volunteers. And this was kind of our first burn as a group. There's Nina on her property. And then we had a great burn window last April and we got a bunch done. So this is a friend of ours, Janaea Donaldson, lighting on her property. This is Round Mountain, kind of bordering BLM land near Edwards Crossing. So we had a great day. There's volunteers on that same burn lighting. There's my at the time 3-month-old child came out and checked it out. So like I said, you don't have to be experienced with fire to come join and hang out. This is another one from last February. This is our buddy Ken Thomas. We did a probably 3-acre burn surrounding his house, and that's just to show it can be a tool for defensible space around your home as well. We had a lot of water, available if something sparks started going that direction. But this was a low-key day in early April. Great fire effects, and we burned a bunch of these 10-hour fuels that I'm not sure how else we would have gotten rid of them besides doing a prescribed burn. I won't go into this. We co-hosted a Trex event this past April as well. That was a good experience. We got rained out though of most of our actual burning time, but the entire Nevada County Fire Safe Council SAL crew got their firefighter type 2 certification and got some basic training in prescribed fire. So it was a good opportunity for them to build up their capacity. And so recently we got a grant from the California Fire Safe Council. It enabled us to buy a burn trailer, which the Fire Safe Council owns. Pays some time for coordination. We have some money to reimburse volunteer fire departments that volunteer on our burns. And we could have money to host trainings also. Here's our gear trailer. We just bought it down in the Sacramento area. This lives at Nevada County Fire Safe Council, but it's a trailer that landowners will be able to rent out that has drip torches, radios, hand tools, fire hose, all the stuff you need to conduct a successful burn. And then also right now, if folks are interested in prescribed burning, we have funding to pay an NWCG burn boss to write burn plans for 12 people. And we've got an application period open for folks to apply for these funds. So we can pay $1,200 towards a burn plan, which for most properties can pay for that. And a burn plan is a document that outlines the prescription for when and how you're going to burn, what's your go, no-go decision. It's an important tool for any prescribed burn with any sort of complexity to it. So we have funding to pay for 12 people to get burn plans, and that application's open for the next month, and I'll paste it in the chat, and happy to talk more about that. And what are we at? I think I've been talking about 10 minutes. A lot of our burnings in the winter. This is actually a slide for a different presentation I did for a group that's thinking about forming a prescribed burn association in the other part of the state. A lot of our burning's done during winter burn windows when CAL FIRE permits are not required. And we actually in our area get pretty good windows from between December and April. Especially with climate change, we're getting these kind of dry spells in the middle of the winter where it dries up after a week or two. And so a lot of burning's done outside of permit season. We do a lot of burning on south slopes. That seems to be the thing that comes into prescription most of the time during that time period. North slopes are a little harder. Prep work for a lot of people in our area own these properties that are quite dense and need a good bit of work done before prescribed fire is really a tool we think about having volunteers using. But we're happy to advise on that and can connect people with like how do you get funding sources to do prep work, and get volunteers out to do that kind of stuff too. I'm gonna ignore those first two bullets because it's not really relevant. And I think that's it. Happy to talk if folks have questions. It's this is kind of a newer model for burning in California. I'm not like a prescribed fire burn boss or prescribed fire practitioner really myself. I'm an ecologist and I'm learning this stuff along with the rest of you. But there are a lot of people with great prescribed fire experience in our area that have been coming out on burns and helping. And then also there are a number of burn bosses throughout the state that you can hire to come help lead a burn, like private consulting burn bosses that carry insurance. And so, yeah, we're navigating all this as we go and hoping to have we have a trailer now and we're going to have at least 12 projects kind of hopefully ready to go by this next burn season. And I'm hoping this tool just escalates and more people start doing burns on their properties. And we're also hoping to build up a more successful like TREX prescribed fire exchange that would be linked in with some of the federal lands so we can share resources with them too, as for folks that want to be especially involved. But yeah, with that, happy to answer any questions, and I'll put a few of the resources I mentioned, like that burn plan application, in the chat too.
Jamie, I think Ellie's had his hand up for a little bit. Ellie, if you want to ask your question.
Amy, thanks. I think this is really exciting. So thanks for sharing this. I wasn't aware that you guys had such a great scope going on. And I was just wondering if you were looking at, I know this is the Yuba watershed group right here, but there's some groups just outside of the Yuba watershed that I think are interested in this as well. Are you guys looking to expand outside the Yuba right now, or are you kind of just focused on the Yuba?
It sort of depends on where, I mean, our area is already bigger than I really have capacity to handle with the middle and North Yuba. But no, I mean, people get in touch with me all the time to talk about this from Truckee and from down in the American. There's actually a group. So there's a prescribed burn association in the Plumas County area that's farther along than we are and has better resources and experience than we do. So they're called the Plumas Underburn Cooperative. And then south of us, there's a group forming in Placer County. So we're helping them. But yeah, most of our work has been in the Grass Valley, Nevada City kind of general area. And then I think there's interest in working up in Truckee too. But it'd be great for there to also be like a Tahoe-based group, But if you have folks that are kind of close, yeah, we definitely consider it. It's not a hard boundary or anything. We're happy to burn anywhere.
We had a question in the chat asking clarification. So is that $1,200 per burn plan or $100 per burn plan for 12 people?
Oh yeah, so it's $1,200 per burn plan. So that should be enough to cover the cost of a burn plan, unless it's a really big, really complex one. But that's the amount of money we have. So we're just framing it as that it's a stipend towards a burn plan, and we can connect a landowner with the consulting burn bosses in our area. And then I'll add too, I got this question yesterday talking about this, like if you wanted to hire a consulting burn boss, lead a burn, which not everyone does. We actually haven't even done that with our group yet. It's been all volunteer led. But for larger burns, it's a good idea. And that's about $1,500 a day. So the incentive is kind of to draw out larger units. It's more of like a per day cost than a per acre cost. I
And we
see
have,
Allison.
yeah, Allison.
There we go. Can you guys hear me? It's working today. Yay. Hey, Jamie. I know we probably talked a little bit about this before, but what can you tell me about like the insurance and liability associated with this? Because my, if I'm thinking as like a landowner, a private landowner, my initial kind of gut reaction is like, whoa, I'm just inviting a bunch of people I don't necessarily know yet to come light fire on my property. And like, what what are either the precautions a landowner could take, or what advice can you give to someone kind of nervous about that?
Totally. Well, it's an important thing, and liability concerns over prescribed burning are a barrier that is getting discussed in the state capitol right now. So things may change in the next 6 months, but California has a simple negligence standard for liability, meaning that you can be held negligent for a fire escape that occurs because of a prescribed burn, but you have some protection in that, like if you follow due diligence practices, or however you're supposed to say that, like having a burn plan, sticking to it, notifying your neighbors, notifying CAL FIRE, having resources that CAL FIRE required in their permit, that provides you some protection as a landowner. One reason to hire a burn boss is a lot of them carry insurance with them. So that $1,500 a day, that's part of what you're paying for there, is one, to have someone lead the burn and make sound decisions, but also to have some insurance for what's going on. For these burns we've done so far, they've all been done in pretty wet conditions in the middle of the winter, and with way more water and way more volunteers on site than you really need. I mean, realistically, most of these projects could have been done with like 3 people, and we've had as many as like 30 to 40 people out on different burns. So some landowners that are more familiar with it, like the ones that have worked with us so far, are willing to accept the risk of being held liable because they're just sure it's not going to escape. But we'd like to build up to where that's not the case. I mean, there's a state bill right now to change the negligence standard for prescribed burning, at least for like the costs of CAL FIRE suppression. It looks like that's going to pass, and I can send info to anyone that is interested in that. And then there's also another state proposal that looks probable to me too, to create an insurance pool for private lands, prescribed burning, that you could draw from in the event of a fire escape, acknowledging that prescribed fire is in the public interest. But neither of those things exist yet, so it kind of depends on the state legislature. But we do have, for burns, there's different ways to structure who holds the liability. We have some forms that a UC Cooperative Extension created with the help of a law firm in San Francisco to, specify like, who would be found liable, based on what, and providing some protection for the volunteers. Generally, though, it's either the landowner or a burn boss are going to be accepting liability for the burn, and you're going to sign something at the beginning of the day that says that.
Gotcha. Thank you. And let's touch base soon too about Yuba County.
Yeah.
And we have another question in the chat from Bree. I unfortunately missed the Trex event this past April. Will there be another Trex training opportunity coming up in early 2022?
We hope so. We're looking for an organization to be willing to serve as the host of the Trex. Sierra Forest Legacy can't do it because of our nonprofit structure. Our fiscal sponsor is not willing to let us be the host. Last year, Yuba Watershed Institute hosted, but with the goal of having us burn on some of their projects on BLM land. But the weather conditions just didn't work out, and BLM is pretty strained for capacity. So I'm not sure where that stands, if we're going to maybe try to do that again. I think we had several folks from the Tahoe National Forest express interest during the last Trex in having like a Trex that would do private lands plus lands on the Tahoe. So would love to explore that more, but we need a host that has some kind of agreement in place that would say they can work with the Tahoe. And then the other idea is to do a purely private lands treks, which we would maybe help with, and maybe all these burn plans that we're divvying out to kind of make up the scope of projects for treks. But I say all that because I bet there's an organization on here that might be an appropriate host, and we'd love to talk to you about it.
Any other questions for Jamie? I imagine he'd be willing to answer questions via email too if you think of them later. Does that sound right, Jamie?
Yeah, I'll just put some stuff in the chat after this.
Great.
Just stuff I just referenced. But yeah, would love to have anyone join the group, and love to have you join for a burn. It's probably realistically going to be a little while before we're putting any fire on the ground. But yeah, once the burn window starts, it all picks up, and there's like a lot of activity. So good to get in the loop now.
Totally, thank you. Yeah, and I'll be sure to include all those resources in today's notes that I'll send out later today. But thank you so much, Jamie. That was an awesome presentation. It's so great to hear about this important tool that it's happening in our region. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Great. Well, now it's my turn to talk to you all. I will share my screen. So today, everyone can see that? A nod. Great. Okay. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about the work we've been doing in the Yuba Forest Network Strategy subgroup. The goal of this presentation is to both give you all, the network, the entire Yuba Forest Network, a progress report of the work we've been doing, and also to provide a way to engage with you all a bit more as a wider audience. And I just ask that everyone hold on to their questions to the very end, and that would be great. I just want to be sure I can cover everything. So over a year ago, in early 2020, we did a needs assessment of over 40 different regional stakeholders, over 30 different organizations, and everyone was asked to identify a single resource that would be most useful to their organization. And the results of that were overwhelmingly fundraising opportunities. That was the top resource identified. Now, in reality, the Yuba Forest Network was never going to be able to answer that question directly. However, we are doing our best to advocate for fundraising opportunities for organizations. And one way we want to do that is through this Yuba Forest Network strategic document. The strategy subgroup has done really incredible work. We've been meeting at least once a month, sometimes more, working really hard to both be collaborative, and that's no easy task, right? We want to be able to address the needs of everyone, but also create this shared vision. And we feel this document is so important for creating next steps. It's a way to identify specific needs to the Yuba Forest Network and to call out actions we can take to ultimately increase pace and scale, right? Why we started this work. And this, to me, and I hope to everyone as well, is really the power of this document. In addition, and I'll talk about this a little bit more as I go through what the document actually includes, it also taps into regional and state level resources. We've really tried to organize ourselves here so that we are set up for success and we're set up for action. So I'm going to go through exactly what this document includes now. So like any document, we start off with the background. We're talking about the Yuba Forest Network, our mission, our vision, our goals. And we also go into the geography as well and our region of influence and what that means. It's been a little while, but I did present on the region of influence at our last quarterly meeting and how we collaboratively define this boundary. But basically it's meant to represent where we're already doing work and where we feel like we can do further work. So to remind you, it's the Yuba River watershed. the Bear River watershed, but mostly the forested sections of that, as well as these fireshed project areas. And in the document, I go into that and those sources and describing again how we define those. So I will be sending out the document later today. So I encourage you to take a look there if you have questions, but I'm also happy to answer any of them. And again, this aligning ourselves with these state and regional efforts, a lot of we have organized the document after the Tahoe Central Sierra Initiative's Resilience Framework, which even longer ago, Pat Manley of TCSI presented on that framework. And we've really used that as a tool to organize the document, to make decisions, and with the goal that we're still collaborating, right, within this larger effort. We're still a part of the region, but we're just trying to focus our actions a bit more and be really specific to who we are as the Yuba Forest Network. So this just helps us tie into our greater regional efforts. And lastly, the document speaks to the purpose of this, which is basically we want to describe our shared vision. We want to describe our desired outcomes for forest health and resilience for the network across stakeholders. And the objective of this is that we set us up to take steps towards project identification, planning, implementation, monitoring. In other words, we just want this to be actionable. We want this to be specific to our region, to us, the Yuba Forest Network. So that's our introduction. And then we get into our desired outcomes. And also at our last quarterly meeting, this was something we got to share. We got to share these desired outcomes with everyone. We organize our desired outcomes by the Tahoe Central Sierra Initiative's resilience pillars. So they have 10 pillars. I've shown here, this is their image from their resilience framework. So for example, there's forest resilience, biodiversity conservation, social and cultural well-being, so on. Each section of our document, for every pillar, we have our shared vision, the regional significance of that vision and of the outcomes, and then further examples of desired outcomes. So like I said, we had the opportunity to share this at our last quarterly meeting, at least just the desired outcomes. And I just wanted to give a brief shout out to everyone who did provide feedback so far. That's really important. This is the network's document, so every feedback engagement is really helpful. So thank you to all those who have done that so far. And if anyone present from the Yuba Forest Network Strategy subgroup would like to share just briefly their experience in creating these desired outcomes, which we've done very collaboratively, I would love that. If just a few comments, either out loud or in the chat, that would be great. And no pressure, but it's been fun. Well, if you do feel inspired to say a few words, by all means, jump in the chat, that'd be great. But it has been very collaborative effort. So those are our desired outcomes after the introduction. The next section of the document is dedicated to describing our actions towards forest resilience for the Yuba Forest Network. Basically, the goal here is we take our strategy, we take this grand shared vision, and we're funneling it down, we're moving it to on the ground action. So these actions are organized by pillars and desired outcomes, but we know that they're going to have a multitude of benefits across the pillars. And really, we want them to be specific to the Yuba Forest Network, specific to our needs, and ultimately actionable. And I'll read the example I have here. So for example, the pillar is forest resilience, and our desired outcome is forest ecosystems are able to recover from disturbance, achieved via active stewardship with the health and resilience of the forest itself as a priority, right? broad shared vision. Now funneling it into on the ground action. The action is to consolidate regional planning and monitoring efforts to build a standardized approach with clear directives and resources from state agencies such as CDFW, Wildlife Conservation Board, Department of Conservation, and Tahoe Central Sierra Initiative. Just an example of the type of action we're including in this document, right? The ultimate power of the document. And this is where we need further engagement. We'll have a breakout group dedicated to that engagement. So please keep this in mind. We're going to come back to this specifically at the end. But just to keep going and tell you more about what's included in this document. The next part is describing key partners' actions, both current and planned, towards forest resilience. So we've had a few organizations voluntarily provide this information. So thank you to Yuba Watershed Institute, Sierra Streams Institute, and the Enterprise Rancheria EPA department. In this section, we describe the organization and their current goals, their planned actions, and how those actions relate to the pillars, those 10 pillars, just bringing it back to our ultimate organization of the document. This is also, so this is a way, an opportunity for us to highlight Yuba Forest Network organizations, to highlight their current and planned actions. But it's also a way for us to visualize where we're doing things really well, where we're seeing a lot of collaboration and a lot of opportunity to collaborate more. So for example, we see forest resilience, social cultural well-being, biodiversity conservation, fire dynamics, fire adapted communities. These pillars are where these three very different organizations, their actions are emphasizing. And in all reality, we're not going to be able to optimize all 10 pillars, right? But this is maybe a way to visualize where we see our strengths and where we can really focus our efforts, focus our actions as well. And to me, this makes sense. We're a forest health collaborative. These are where our skills lie, and this is where we can really focus our efforts to see our desired outcomes achieved. So it's showing off our strengths, it's showing off our greatest opportunities. And it would be excellent to have more organizations represented here. Really, this is a visual tool, but I think it's incredibly useful. And I would love to highlight each and every one of you here. So if you're interested, reach out to me and we can talk more about that. And I'll also say that this could be an opportunity to think about who do we still need to engage further? And that would be excellent too. We don't want to, our doors are never closed, right? And there's many stakeholders in this region and we'd like to engage further. So just wanted to say that briefly. Lastly, our document includes, we have an appendix of maps and figures. Sources are cited throughout the document. We're really trying to still base this in science and frameworks and guides for the region. And we also include acknowledgements. Like I said, this is absolutely a collaborative effort. Specifically, the strategy subgroup members have devoted a lot of time into making this happen. And so it's important that they're acknowledged, and anyone else who'd like to participate, whether it's even just, a thought here or there, this is an opportunity to consolidate our voices and share them out. So I'm gonna pause there for a moment. Yeah, Andrew.
I just wanted to chime in and say that with these strategic actions, none of this is existing in a vacuum, right? Every one of these organizations and every one of you on this call are working on your independent actions, right? And I think what we're really trying to get at is, where can we find more space for collaboration? How can we write that roadmap for collaboration? When we talk about specific actions, in some ways we're trying to acknowledge where these gaps are, and then who can fill them, not just how we can fill them. And so by creating that roadmap, we know that we have certain strengths. And Jean, I see your question there in the chat box about CAL FIRE. And I'd say, I think it was 6 months ago, 2 meetings ago, we had Chief Matthias and Landon Hack come present and talk about CAL FIRE and how our groups how we relate sort of to CAL FIRE's plans for our region. And there's not really a straightforward answer, but I know that there are some groups who are on this call who've tried to tie into the Yuba Rim, the South Yuba Rim fuel break that CAL FIRE is working on. And I know these are goals of the state as well, as how do groups like ours continue to work with CAL FIRE, an organization that historically has operated as an independent entity. And so Patrick Wright will be joining us shortly, and it's another question we can kind of pose for him as well, both locally and at the state level. I think CAL FIRE is still challenged by that. It's also really challenging to work as an outside entity when they are so busy, and thank goodness they're doing what they're doing, but it is really tough, right? When we lose them for 3 to 6 months of the year. And so, yeah, with that, I would just say we don't want to dismiss any of the hard work that's already happening. I mean, Nevada County is doing so much on their own as well. And like Jamie talked about earlier, it's just we're trying to augment that and build this roadmap for future collaboration in really specific ways that we can also use to help us go back to that stakeholder need number one, which was funding.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, so now I want to actually, let's see. Are there any other questions about anything I just covered? Just for a few minutes, and then I'm going to move us on to our breakout activity. Okay, no problem. So, like I said earlier in the presentation, I want us to think about those actions and return to that portion. To have impacts for the network, we need to hear from you all. And that's the point of this presentation, right? To bring it out of the strategy subgroup and into the whole network. So the goal here is to, with this action in mind, as an example, I'd like to have everyone break out into small groups. And if you could consider and share your most recent success, as well as anticipated barriers in the coming months to achieving your project, whatever that may be. I recognize not everyone does implementation, not everyone does planning, so and so forth. So within your organization, thinking about those successes, those barriers, and the actions you took either to achieve that or that you think would help you achieve that. So just give me a second here, and I'm gonna set up breakout groups real quick. So we have just a few minutes. If anyone could share briefly, you can turn on your microphone and share or put it in the chat. I'd love to hear about any specific actions that came up during your breakout groups. Please don't talk over yourselves.
Mary, this is Carrie Rennie with the Yuba Irwimp, and I talked with Sherilyn of the United Auburn Indian Community. Sorry if I got that acronym wrong, Sherilyn. So I sort of derailed us a little bit talking about Irwimp and trying to connect to different tribal groups, which was actually really helpful. The Yuba Forest Network has been a really great connection for the Irwimp to try and get in touch with stakeholders through some resource topic areas that are harder for us to access without being involved in groups like this. So thank you. And really, I think just having these relationships and information sharing has been really critical. And Sherilyn mentioned doing burning and preparing for burns on United Auburn lands. It has been an important piece for them, and also just making sure that they're engaged in some of these efforts to make sure that the native plant knowledge is there in terms of some of these projects and identified in the strategies, and the presence is really important. And for the Yuba Irwimp, just I think really a lot of this information sharing and being involved in and hearing about different activities in the upper watersheds of the Yuba is really critical for the Irwimp, and linking that back to the Yuba Water Agency as one of the largest sort of actors or partners in the Irwimp at this point is really important too.
Thank you so much, Carrie. That's really awesome. I'm glad you got a chance to talk with Sherilyn. She's been like a dedicated participant of the strategy subgroup, so I really appreciate all the engagement you provided us too. So I'm going to stop us there. If you have any other actions that came up in your breakout groups, please send them my way. You can email me at mary@yubariver.org, and I'll put that in the chat as well. But for now, I'm going to hand it off to Andrew.
Yeah, so on to our last agenda item. We have Patrick Wright, the director of the Governor's Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force, joining us today. Patrick, thank you so much for being here. Our group is quite a bit smaller than usual, just due to the nature of what's happening in our community. And unfortunately, many of us are affected by the river fire, and know many people who are affected. And so there are several who aren't here. But Patrick, just to give a brief introduction to Patrick, he started in an interim role last summer as the director of the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force. It became a full appointment this spring. And formerly he was the director of Tahoe Conservancy dating back to 2006. So he's well experienced in state government and our region as well. And in January, the Forest Management Task Force released a comprehensive action plan to reduce wildfire risk for vulnerable communities, forest health, and accelerate action, and specifically calling out climate change as well. And so that plan, it sets a really ambitious goal about how to scale up forest management to restore 1 million acres annually by 2025 across both state and federal lands. And so we're really lucky to have him, and just figuring out ways that as a smaller stakeholder group in our region, how we can tie into the larger efforts of the state, and what that kind of two-way relationship might look like. So thanks so much, Patrick.
Yes, and thank you, Andrew. Yeah, it's a very unfortunate time, obviously, for all the folks that are having to deal with the fires right now. I'm just indirectly affected starting today. The Tahoe Basin, where I live, just got enveloped this morning. My air quality numbers are literally 500 this morning, so it's pretty brutal for everybody from a life, property, health situation. With respect to the task force, I won't walk you through all the nuances of it, but I can give you a flavor of the basics. We've transitioned the task force from being solely a state-oriented task force to one that now has, used to have Randy Moore and now has Jennifer Eberline, the new regional forester, as co-chairs with Wade Crowfoot. We've got tribal reps, we've got county reps, et cetera, specifically to send a message that moving forward needs to be a collaborative effort of federal, state, local, and tribal agencies. So that's sort of how we're structured, with an executive committee at the top. The local execs are the heads of CSAC and RCRC. We have Don Hankins from the Intertribal Indigenous Stewardship Network, I think it's called. And we've got the heads of CAL FIRE, OPR, Resources Agency, and Cal EPA from the state level. So the task force as a whole is meeting quarterly. We are putting together a series of state-oriented strategies to, as Andrew said, to ramp up to 1 million acres treated, to have a prescribed fire strategic plan for 2025, a reforestation strategy, a wood utilization strategy, a strategy for private landowners. A big part of my job and the task force job is to take in each of those areas what are now siloed, often ad hoc programs between state, federal, local, and tribal, and try to get everybody sort of moving forward together. As you guys probably know better than, or as well as I do, Candidly, there isn't a long history of CAL FIRE and the Forest Service working together on these issues. Folks tend to focus on Forest Service until recently has focused almost exclusively on its own land, and only now with the stewardship agreement being signed and some of the good neighbor agreements, where I think there's a much more openness now on the part of everybody to collaborate at the state level. Of course, that's happened at the local level for quite some time now, and your group is certainly a great example of that. So one of the things we're trying to do, in addition to these statewide strategies, is to start to build out a regional network and framework, particularly under the RFFC program. And we're increasingly talking about doing that now at 3 different levels. One is sort of what we're calling the big 4 areas, which are, North Coast, Sierra Nevada, Central Coast, and Southern California. So for each of those big, larger regions, we will have roughly quarterly forums. So folks involved with those regions have an opportunity to hear from each other, get up to date from state and federal officials on what's happening, to, in effect, create a series of regional forums. And then together with that, a set of regional profiles that our science advisory panel is pulling together to help guide state investments and to help some of the local collaboratives get on the same page with where they're going with key risk and priorities in each of those larger regions. So that's sort of the big 4 level. And then below that, which is I think where a lot of the action is growing out the state's RFFC program to go statewide. And the thinking there is, and I was one of the founders of the Tahoe Central Sierra Initiative when I was at Tahoe, is the idea is that if we can start doing more at that larger regional level, it gives us some opportunities to do things that aren't possible at a local level. Things like larger climate adaptation strategies, migratory corridors, wood utilization strategies, real opportunity to think big, to really increase pace and scale through these larger frameworks. So that's sort of the second level, is these, will probably be 15 to 20 of these regional frameworks or priority plans that are coming together statewide. And then the third tier, of course, is the collaborative level, where there are, a couple dozen collaboratives working, throughout the state. We want to promote them. We want to accelerate them. But it's a challenge sort of doing that because, of course, collaboratives don't cover the whole state. So we're trying to figure out, how do you develop a statewide network that respects the diversity and the priorities and the jurisdictions that are developed locally? It's not going to be like, say, the state's network of air boards and water boards that all have a very similar focus, a similar network. But there is a strong desire to be able to roll up the work of the collaboratives in the regions to say statewide what we're accomplishing. So we're spending a lot of time trying to work together to try to come up with a common but flexible framework that reflects the fact that some of these areas are small, some are huge, like the North Coast, which takes up 12% of the state. Some are highly sophisticated, using LiDAR, artificial intelligence, decision support systems, all sorts of things. Others are struggling with just a handful of GIS maps. And they have different goals. I mean, most of them, of course, are focused on various aspects of forest and watershed health. Some areas have much more of a focus, say in the North Coast, on fish passage and water. In fact, up there, they've combined their IRWMP, as you were just discussing, their IRWMP, with their forest plan. Other areas, say the Eastern Sierra, are more interested in promoting, say, recreation. So again, how do you respect the fact that each part of the state has somewhat of a different emphasis, and yet we want everybody to sort of, over time, to grow their regional frameworks to address all of the key goals of forest health, from carbon storage to biodiversity to local economic development, et cetera, that are represented by some of the, if you've seen them, the 10 pillars that Sierra Nevada Conservancy and Tahoe have worked on. So it's going to be a work in progress. It's probably going to take years to try to promote collaboratives to slowly, over time, increase their sophistication, increase the scope of what they're doing. but do that in a way that kind of respects where they are locally, but also meets our need at the state level, particularly with all the fires and all the attention. There's sort of become this gradual transition from a very, very decentralized system to trying to exert more regional and state leadership. So it's not going to be easy because we've got these sort of twin pressures. On the one hand, we're being told every day by Sacramento and by Washington, go fast, increase space and scale. But on the other hand, slow down, be collaborative, make sure you have everybody on board. And so how is it that we can hit that sweet spot where we can use state and federal money and templates and tools and decision support systems and technology to help speed things along through a common framework? So there's no obvious way to do this. Again, we're sort of making this up as we go, and we certainly don't want these regional strategies to be another regulatory layer in any way. The idea is to have them designed to help speed the work of collaboratives. If at the regional level, assessments have already been done, goals have been fairly well established, there's a lot of scientific work done, the hope, or at least the idea, is that'll help some of the subgroups move faster than they otherwise would. You know, example I give often is 2 years ago, I was down at a South Fork American River Collaborative meeting, and they had just spent 2.5 years coming up with their desired conditions. And I read through them, and they looked identical to the ones we had done in Tahoe. So, so one of the idea is at the state level, can we create some of these toolkits or templates for the region to say, here's a starting point, don't start from scratch. You know, all of you are going to take this and you're going to tweak it to match your local risk and your local priorities. But there actually has been a fair amount of thinking done throughout the Sierra, throughout the state, over what the key risks are and what the key priorities are in each region. Let's work together to accelerate your work. And the hope also over time is that we will then transition from right now exclusively top-down grant programs from CAL FIRE, from WCB, from Fish and Wildlife and other agencies to individual projects to block grants to regions. So the idea is once these regional plans come together, I don't know that we'll formally approve them. And certainly the idea is to not make them as highly structured and mandated as IRWM, but once they do come together, to use these regional frameworks as an opportunity for CAL FIRE and the other agencies to give regions, grants that could be for, projects that go for as long as 5 or 10 years. Because one of the things that we know all the collaboratives are struggling with, regions are struggling with, I struggled with this in Tahoe, is if you're dependent upon competitive grants, you can't plan. You can't hire, contractors, consultants, planners, if you don't know if that's, and also you spend an enormous amount of time and money on grant applications that may or may not go anywhere. So better over time to assure every region that you're going to get reliable, sustained funding. So easy to say that that's where we want to go. And again, we're all sort of developing this, as we talk. But that's the idea, to promote regional frameworks and sustain funding that has a common framework, but one that also recognizes, the very differences that are out there. That's really about it. All this is under development. The RFSC guidelines are going to be written over the next year. So no real decisions have been made other than to promote the framework and promote the idea that we need to shift a lot of the funding and emphasis from, the state level and the federal level, down to the subregions and the collaborative level. And certainly want to hear from you and others. I've already had some really good conversations with Andrew about, where some of these state and regional frameworks can add the most value at the collaborative level versus getting in the way of what folks are doing. And so a lot of it is just going to be more time spent one-on-one between some of the Sacramento leaders and these local groups to find out more about, if there is additional money, how would you use it? How would you expand what you're doing? How would it increase your ability to prioritize or get projects done on the ground? So that's sort of a lot in a few minutes, but that I hope gives you a flavor where at least some of the trends are going with the task force and our regional frameworks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Patrick. We really appreciate that. I think we definitely have some time for questions. So if folks would like to ask any, I'll just kick one off. And I guess one of my questions is, you mentioned these tools and toolkits. How could a group like ours, say, request something like that we know is scaled, right? So
Right.
one, we're putting together we're putting together some strategic actions for this group.
Right.
And part of that some of those are requests. They are, the example that Mary showed this morning actually included, we'd love to have monitoring standards that were more universal, so
Right.
that we're not having to come up with individual metrics every time, right?
Right.
And for so many different things that we don't necessarily have the expertise in the room for.
Right.
So is that something that the state could put together, or that could be at the state level that then trickles down to us once those, you could provide the guidance document, or
Right.
but how do we, so for one, that's a very specific question, but then
Yeah.
to zoom back out, how do we put those requests in, or who do we float those ideas by as time goes forward? I mean, is there a network?
No, I mean, those are great questions that we're trying to answer right now. And I think one of the things that complicates the answer to that is that, unlike, again, take the IRWMP program, you would just call DWR, and DWR would have all the tools that you need. In the forest world, CAL FIRE and Forest Service have never been set up to provide that role. Okay, so the DOC, Department of Conservation's RFFC program, is being built specifically for capacity building. So this is the kind of conversation you need to have primarily with them. And so they are the folks that I would say are the go-to folks right now, and they are building strong relationships with the Forest Service and CAL FIRE. So they're not operating in a silo. But those are classic examples of the kinds of things, templates that I think the state could provide. What also makes it complicated, unlike, say, again, the water world or the air quality world, is that, as you know, Andrew, there are a wide range of private entities out there that are arguably more flexible and more sophisticated than the state and federal agencies in providing some of those tools. And to be candid, I think we at the state and federal level are struggling with that, because you've got both the Forest Service and you've got CAL FIRE developing tools for monitoring, tools for decision support, tools for scenario planning, but on a fairly slow scale over the next couple of years, where meanwhile, you've got a bunch of private companies that have got those templates already up now, ready to go, but they're also charging for them. And so literally what is happening is some of these private companies are going around the state, collaborative to collaborative, saying, look, I've got this dazzling decision support tool that's really user-friendly, that will help you prioritize projects and get going, and it's very attractive. And so again, how do we as state and federal agencies take advantage of that? There's a strong sense among the leadership, particularly on the federal side, not to pick one tool, to allow collaboratives, and many of these are already underway. They're already under contract with various private companies to do decision support and prioritize. The last thing that the leadership of the state and federal folks want to say is, nope, you got to use this tool, like IRWMP says. On the other hand, that's going to lead to maybe a dozen collaboratives using a dozen different tools. So how do you then come up with something at the state and federal level that allows them to talk to each other so that we can report out at the state level? And I'm not going to tell you what we have figured out how to do that. It's a very messy situation, but it's one that's on the negative side. On the positive side, though, the fact that there is this explosion of private sector tools is great if we can figure out a way to best take advantage of it. And we're just right now in the process of trying to figure that out.
Thank you. Thank you. Julie, I see that you have a question in the chat. Did you want to ask that, or would you like me to read it out?
I can ask it. Sorry here. I just was wondering if you have like a summary of this kind of overall process, because I was taking notes, but it's pretty dense and I would maybe want to share with some other folks in my organization. Is there something you could point us to?
Not yet. I mean, hopefully the Department of Conservation's RFFC, I mean, you could go on the website of the RFFC program. It will describe the various regional frameworks, their current guidance documents, what's required. Basically, the way their program started initially was the focus was just getting priority lists of projects together, and not so much worried, given the crisis that we're under, with building broader, more sophisticated plans with assessments and targets and monitoring. We're in sort of a transition phase now where they understand we need to go there. But for now, that's probably the best place to go, is the regional forest and fire. Is it for? I keep getting these mixed up. Is it forest and fire capacity or fire and forest capacity? Neither of them makes sense to me, so I confuse them. But it's the RFFC program at the Department of Conservation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? Or... Hearing none, Patrick, I'll ask another. One of those is that we're struggling with right now in the North Yuba is that the issue with mills, and I'm sure you're hearing this all over the state, but we don't have a mill where we've got these great restoration projects planned.
Right.
They're ready to go. They're marked. They're done on the ground. We even have a contractor some of it's ready to harvest. But we have nowhere to send the timber from these restoration projects because SPI is no longer buying, and they're sort of the only shop in town, at least here. And so is there anything that the state is doing, or at a larger level, to try and encourage? I know that there hasn't, it's a nightmare of a system, right? There's just too few mills at this point, and nobody's willing to invest. And I don't know, with maybe, is it iBank or others? Are they considering investing in mills? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, there's various efforts underway. It's not, as you probably know, one of the things that governments do best is stimulate, the private sector. We're trying many of the same tools that, have been tried before. There's a catalyst fund that's in the governor's budget to provide some, very, very inexpensive loan money for firms to get going. Certainly that's one aspect of the issue. Another big aspect that we hear from everybody is, from the forestry side is, sorry, let me get rid of this, is the lack of long-term contracts. And, the fact that, mills to get started need to have a more reliable supply. So again, I think what we're trying to do is move towards trying to get a lot of these collaboratives in a position like yours, where, and particularly with the Forest Service, to have programs of work that might be 10 years of programs of work with sustained funding. And so the idea is, if we can combine block grants with regional collaboratives and regional plans, that will help unlock some of the private sector work. But there's no simple solution to this issue. People, as you know, have been working on it for years. We've got folks working on the contracting side. We've got folks working on the demand side. There's a couple of pilot areas, but it's a tough issue, particularly since, a lot of the material that we're talking about is small diameter trees, for which, there isn't a big market. But it has not escaped folks' attention that, California continues to import most of its wood, while folks doing forest thinning projects can't find places to send it. It's probably one of the largest challenges that we face, but we're working on it several fronts. But I don't want to mislead you into thinking that there's, great progress around the corner. I think it's likely to happen region by region. Again, one of the things that we did through the Tahoe Central Sierra Initiative is actually had a whole analysis done of the entire region for those of you who don't know, between roughly the foothills above Sacramento and Tahoe, between 50 and 80, to look at that entire area, to think about where should the mills be, if there are, where can wood come off, to really start pushing the Forest Service in particular to think about 10 and 20-year scopes of work, with the idea that that might help get a market going. So, so that's a long-winded answer, long-winded non-answer.
I mean, but that's even helpful for just to even hear about the fact that TCSI has that information, because I actually sit on one of the science committees there, and I haven't even heard of this report. So it's like disseminating that information is something that we've also really struggled with, like getting it down to our level, because, not saying that anyone on this call here today is necessarily equipped to take this on, but if we knew for our region where has, because we are in the TCSI region, but just having them give us suggestions as well, it's sort of that two-way street that I was referring to earlier, would be incredibly helpful, because there could be a grassroots movement. It seems crazy, but a grassroots led sort of movement to encourage a business owner to start helping us start looking into where we could site a mill in our watershed, if that's a possibility, or where the best locations would be, because we actually are really well positioned. We have something that's going to be close to a 20-year program of work with the North Yuba, and we have a number of smaller projects that are also occurring from the county level to some of our nonprofits that are on the call today as well. And so I guess we just don't have all of those other details or areas that are outside of our immediate sort of purview.
Yeah, it's been one of the shortcomings of the TCSI effort, is it's a little bit too top down. And, as I said before, one of the potential advantages of these much larger scale regional frameworks is to be able to deal with issues like this. But of course, it can't be of use to you unless you're aware of it. I could certainly follow up with you to make sure it was analysis done by TNC that was pretty sophisticated, looking at, the entire region, and, how much wood, is near roads versus further from roads, and how much is accessible. And looking at all the different transportation routes in the whole region. So that is an example of the kinds of things, as we discussed earlier, that if we can do at the state and regional level, it can make work at the collaborative level much easier. Obviously, we don't want to put the burden on every small underfunded collaborative in the state to try to figure out, what do they do with their wood? How do they assess the health of their forest? How do they come up with decision support? All these things we're talking about. So yeah, we definitely hear you on that.
Well, great. Does any last questions? We're running short. We've got about 4 minutes left here. I know Mary might want to review some next steps as well. Thank you so much, Patrick. Unless anybody has any other comments, we really appreciate this.
All right, thank you all. We'll be look forward to once I don't know, between the fires and COVID, looking forward to getting into your neck of the woods and seeing firsthand some of the great projects you guys have made. It has not escaped the attention of folks in Sacramento what good progress you're making, but it's obviously more challenging when you can't get out and see it firsthand.
And Patrick, I'd love to share just one resource with you, which is we actually have a map of all of our stakeholder projects in our region, and it captures everything that's been done, including Forest Service lands, state parks lands, and several of the groups here, including some of our smaller nonprofits. And I'll just drop that in the chat real quick. But thank you. And with that, I'll pass it back to Mary real quick.
All right.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
Well, thank you to everyone too for being here again today, despite our backyard burning. And thank you, Jamie. I had to hop off, but I just want to give him thanks too for presenting earlier today. Now, if anyone has any follow-up questions or feedback, you're welcome to reach out to me. at any point. Like I said, I'll be sharing notes from today. This is recorded as well, so I'll be sharing the link as well, and then the document, which I don't think I emphasized this, but it is a draft, and I am currently looking for your feedback at this point. So I'm excited to share our progress with you. It is about 30 pages, but so carve out some time if you can, and I think you'll find it really informational and hopefully actionable. But like I said, I'm really hoping to incorporate more of everyone's voices in that as well. And then also, lastly, I just have a quick poll I'm going to drop in the chat, and I'll also include this when I send out my notes. But if anyone has suggestions or requests of what they'd like to see at upcoming meetings, it's an opportunity for you to share that, as well as general feedback. It should only take you like 2 minutes. It's very brief. And with that, that concludes our meeting.
Thanks so much, Mary. And thank you. And it's been great to work with you for the last 2 years.
Thank you.